This world is at a tremble with its strength and mighty power. They're sending up to heaven to get the brimstone fire. Take warning, my dear brothers,
April the 30th.
be careful how you plan.
Welcome,
You're working
everybody.
with the power of God's own holy hand.
Zero love you today.
Atomic
Thank you
power.
for finding the site. It took me 10 years to get several people in the
Was
show.
given by the mighty hand of God.
Nuclear industry can't survive without censorship, right? This is the Alps decontamination system under construction in 2013, but they didn't so-called finish it until the end of 2014. That's quite interesting, isn't it? I thought so.
The Fukushima plant sits smack in the middle of an
This is a BBC report of 2013, I think it was September. And they're saying 1,000 tanks were filled up. And this is how they filled them up, a short video.
underground aquifer. Deep beneath the ground, the site is rapidly being overwhelmed by water. Beneath the surface, water flows downhill and into the basement of the damaged reactor buildings. There it is contaminated with high levels of radiation. To stop the groundwater flowing on into the nearby ocean, engineers are building an underground barrier. But that is causing the groundwater level to rapidly rise. It's now so high the water will soon reach the surface. Then it will start flowing overground into the sea. This week, the company that owns Fukushima, TEPCO, made this disturbing admission.
We
understand that this water discharge is beyond our control, and we do not think the current situation is good.
Outside experts say it's now clear TEPCO is incapable of handling the cleanup at Fukushima. It's time for the Japanese government to step in. The situation is already beyond what TEPCO can handle, he says. If it were possible to take proper measures, they would have done it already. It's not as if TEPCO is refusing to do what they can. They're doing everything they can, but there are no perfect solutions. Even if the government does step in, it's not clear what it can do. The only other solution is to pump out the contaminated groundwater and put it in storage tanks. But after just 2 years, the site is already jammed with more than 1,000 giant tanks. Most of them are already full up. At least 400 tons of new water pours into the site every day, and it's going to continue for years and years. Fukushima's water crisis has only just begun. Rupert Winfield-Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
But that's 2013. This is February 2013. They're just starting the construction. So 1,000 tanks were full in 2013 from water under the reactors. There was no filtration system. The Riva system didn't work. Now, I done a whole presentation last night just on the Alps system and the water filtration systems. Because there was the Riva, there was the Siri system, there was the Kurian system. But these were all meant to mislead you. Painstakingly took you down the path. Keep it in a perspective. Remember, the reactors actually blew up. People seem to forget the reactors blew up and they don't exist anymore. They actually blew up. That's only 2 of the 4 reactors, and there's 4 fuel pools between those 2 reactors. 2 at the top of each building. They're gone. This is a plume model of 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air from the French government. This model is only based upon 30 days of radioactive fallout. And currently you're at day 16. So by day 30, the whole planet is completely covered in radioactive fallout, right? So you got these... This country should be abandoned. I got a poll tonight to help articulate that, to bring that point to the forefront, that the country is a nuclear wasteland. This is not up for debate. It should be abandoned due to the massive, incredibly massive radioactive fallout, because the reactors actually are destroyed. Now, the official story is that never happened. As of July the 13th, 2023, the official story, they moved the goalposts. The International Atomic Energy Agency is orchestrating this. This headline just came out a few hours ago. Dismissing concerns, Japan Prime Minister invites a number of ministers to eat seafood from the sea in Fukushima. And somehow that means this never happened. That means that the plumes didn't cover the planet, that the reactor, this is a plutonium mixed oxide fuel reactor, for goodness sakes. They're suggesting that didn't happen by making those particular connotations, right? He'll be removed in the near future, just like every other prime minister. They're literally just useful idiots, and they never see a whole term, except for Shinzo Abe, who promoted poisoning the entire planet with food from a nuclear wasteland. And he got his now, didn't he? Thank goodness. Prime Minister Kishida, which is the furthest thing from a prime minister, and several ministers, why don't you name them, ate seafood from the seas off the coast of Fukushima amid concerns about the impact of the releases of the treated. You can't treat water from a nuclear meltdown. I played the video, and here's documentation, and I'll show you those stories so you can go read them yourself after. The lunch season is considered aimed at eliminating concerns about the possible negative impact of water dumped on the human health. Well, this is the TEPCO's numbers of the Neptunium-239 based on 20 days of radioactive fallout covering the entire planet. We have a similar model just like it for uranium or plutonium-239, as well as reputational damage to the fishery products from the area around Japan's northeastern prefecture. And so what they had done in 2013 was to roll out the major media, and the media was pretending they're in the fuel pool to do the exact same thing as they done with their lunch. Let me play it for you.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
Nice. So here they are pretending they're in a building that don't exist. At what point should the world say, hey, wait a second, this is not right? Are we ever going to get to that point? Because I created this picture almost 10 years ago, this video. I didn't create the videos, put the 4 videos together with a picture of Reactor 4. And almost 10 years later, nobody seems to have repeated that picture. Nobody's reposted it. What's going on? Really, what's going on, though? How is that even possible? So with rice harvested from Fukushima, the farmers are growing nearby the nuclear meltdown. There's 30 million one-ton bags that they picked up. I got a little video to go with that. Just bear with me. I just want to show you how crazy the story really is, because I'm having a hard time comprehending why the world is sitting in silence. You really think you're going to get away with this? You think this is not going to affect you and your children? You really think that you're fucking immune to radiation? Do you really? I can assure you you're not. And you're just digging a hole you can't get out of. They're growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation in a nuclear wasteland. And this is how insane the International Atomic Energy Agency, who orchestrates all this, by the way, and the Japan and the nuclear industry are. They're growing food alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. And this picture is from the news media chastising people for criticizing the farmers. There's a picture from the media criticizing people for criticizing the farmers about growing food in a nuclear wasteland. The The farmer said, I wouldn't dare eat it. We feel guilty growing it. And so you should. It's a nuclear wasteland. Do you understand the meaning of die in the word decontamination? We're just tilling deeper and spreading the radiation thinly, but it never stops falling out. We're not removing the radiation. They're by the nuclear meltdowns, they're not even digging up topsoil. They're just flipping the soil over so that the roots can suck up the radiation. No wonder the radiation levels have not gone down. We measured the radioactivity in the air. It's not gone down.
あと一つ言っておくことがあるんですけれども、福島県は農作物は出荷の前に全部検査しないと出荷できません。今は100ベクレル以下っていうことになってますけれども、農家が生産している、私は分かりますよ、これが何ベクレルあるって。放射能要は100ベクレル以下だったら出荷できるわけですから、私は食べませんよ。買って食べる人は放射能メイド持って買って食ってるってどうなの？俺らは分かってんだよ。罪の意識になるの作ってなって。自分は食わねえけど人の人に食わせてんの。どう思いますか？ちょっと答えてください。
But it goes to show you how people, through Spider-Man and the Hulk and the constant propaganda for 80 years of bananas and potato chips, that even the farmers who are growing it in a nuclear wasteland, they know it's bad, but they don't understand why it's bad. They're not able to comprehend the enormity of the genocide that their product creates. So single farmers is creating a genocide. There's tens of thousands of farmers just in Fukushima. The food was banned from 14 prefectures by 55 countries for over a decade. I highlighted those on a Google map for you. And I mean, they're growing food right alongside a 1-ton bag, but in the nuclear wasteland itself, but they're surrounded by 13 other nuclear wastelands. So dismissing concerns, Japan Prime Minister invites a number of ministers to eat seafood from the sea in Fukushima. With rice harvested from the nuclear wasteland, why would you eat food from there? Why not grow it somewhere else? Why is it so necessary to grow it in a nuclear wasteland? We need to inform the public at home and abroad about the safety of the seafood captured at sea near the Fukushima nuclear complex, they told reporters after the meeting. And they claimed that most radionuclides, except for tritium, have been removed from the dumped wastewater through the purification. You can't purify it, and I'll show it to you. Tritium known to be less harmful to humans than other radioactive material like cesium and strontium because it emits a weak radiation. Well, it's organically bound when it enters your body. There's nothing weak about it. It's still pulsing energy at the speed of light. It's weak compared to the other isotopes, but it's not weak when it comes to inflicting diseases and illnesses and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. And is brutally strong for insects and birds and small animals. It's not accumulated in the body. Of course, this is a complete dishonest, an unbelievable dishonest assertion. It's organically bound. The problem with tritium, of course, is we don't have an autoimmune trigger. There's nothing else on the planet does, an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. Your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells because it's pulsing energy almost at the speed of light. And it's not stardust. It's not from the solar system. Your body doesn't know what it is. And so there's a cause and effect right away, right? Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency, who says that the reactors didn't even melt down, right? They're the ones that orchestrated that. They're the ones that, they're saying last year that these buildings now didn't melt down. They moved the goalposts, and there's zero opposition worldwide. And Kishida's just another long list of scumbags. They're just talking heads for whatever the secretary gives them, right? They're not the shakers and movers. They're the ones that are willing to sell their souls the quickest for fame, for fortune, and because they're desensitized or they're subhuman. They don't care about other people or the species or the country. New images from Diachi press conference or press tour, 2013, February 11th. The images were released by the press pool and show the current conditions at Fukushima Daiichi. There are also some flyover shots that show the extent of the expansion around the plant of tanks and other storage. So I played you a video from later in the year where they said all the tanks were full, 1,000 of them. But this is the ALPS system. That's the ALPS decontamination system under construction. And so in 2013, we were hoping to have it operating, they said, by September of that year. And they're talking about the series system can remove cesium, but it doesn't work that way. All the atoms are the same size. You can't just target a specific atom. It's completely voodoo stuff they're talking about. But the reality of it was, they had there's no such thing as leaks. The buildings were actually destroyed, right? So Fukushima contaminated problem worse. August 9, 2014. Go read that story. So they think in 2014, in August 9, 2014, they think they finally have the ALPS decontamination system operational. It's the end of 2014, 3.5 years later. The tanks were, like the reactor, when the reactor melted down, it didn't matter if you had 1,000 tanks sitting there. You can fill up 1,000 tanks 6 times a day with just a single reactor. You know, in normal operations, it's 4,500 tons a minute, 1 million gallons a minute. Like, if you fill up the tank with the radioactive water, and I covered that last night pretty heavily, from, nuclear meltdowns, you can't get back on the site. If you build 1,000 tanks, you fill them up, you can't get back within 10 miles of that place without getting a lethal dose. Like, this is not rocket science. It's not very hard to understand. The buildings are actually gone. But the official story is that never happened. They changed it, right? The whole story is just insanity where we lose everything. So they took these 2 stumps and they built contraptions off-site and brought in them and installed them over the buildings. But they don't physically touch the buildings. The buildings were raised all the way almost to the ground, but there's no reason normally not to raise this all the way to the ground. The only reason they kept the stumps there was so they can hoodwink you. And they've been at this a very long time. Pretending they're in a building that doesn't exist. Because it's like a banana or because it's killing our planet. It's hard to comprehend why the world sits in silence when the reality is so simple. Plutonium-239 dispersal based on 20 days. That model is 20 days later, rather. So it's based on 15 days of radioactive fallout after the last reactor detonated. Remember, they banned the food worldwide in 55 countries from 14 prefectures for a decade because it's a nuclear wasteland. So last year, on July the 13th, Young Jong-il, a professor at the Department of Quantum and Nuclear Engineering in South Korea, came out and said that the only thing got out was 2.2 grams of tritium, and that's in 1,000 tanks, and that dumping it in the ocean was equal to 3 grams of sugar. This is a professor at the Department of Quantum and Nuclear Engineering, for goodness sakes, telling you that didn't happen, saying there was no releases whatsoever from that. What do you think all of these people are willing to do something like that? Because this is a genocide machine. This is an extinction event. And the longer you stay silent, the harder it is for you to claw back your future, your children's future, or the future of humanity. So I've been on the show doing this show for over a decade live. I got 13 people on my show. On the most important subject in human history, because somebody at YouTube gets a big fat paycheck to stop everybody else on the planet from having a future. And you wouldn't believe, like half the people watching the show are from the industry, are here to monitor you and me. Because they get a big fat check to destroy the future of humanity. And then they go home. They don't tell their loved ones what they're doing. They go home and pretend they're good people. Because they're morons, right? Morons with a lot of money, they'll say to me. But they're still morons. Because they don't understand. And you got to realize how long these morons have been around. You got 80 years of the media stabbing you in the face blatantly, too. And they're doing the exact same thing today. The reactors actually blew up. But yet, the official story is now nothing got out, and what did get out was equal to 3 grams of sugar. And if you look at the detonation of reactor 3, which is behind me, that's reactor 1 over there, that's the fuel pools in the reactor cores you're going to see starting to fall back down to Earth. Remember, this is slow motion. That's the fuel pool in the reactor core falling back down on the site. This is why no nuclear scientists went there, because, it actually melted down. And each of the reactor cores, and there's around 9 in each building, each one of them is equal to about 100 Chernobyls. It's hard to appreciate how big those buildings are. So this is a frame they put around reactor 1, which is an identical to reactor 2, 3, and 4 at Fukushima. You can see a person stood up right there. This is the first layer. So that top part there is this part here. You can't see the rest of it. Right, so that top part up right there is this part here. But when you look at this, the scale doesn't really, you're not able to appreciate the scale. So it's 4 of these stacked on top of each other. 19 stories, 190 foot, 65 meters. These are very big buildings. These are 50 meters, 150 feet wide. And they're not there pretending that they're in the fuel pool, because the fuel pool is there. They're there to trick you so you can't have a future. And you need to get it together. Nobody else is going to do it. You need to do it. You have. It's your turn. This is your watch. It's your responsibility. You're obligated. It's your obligation under your Bill of Rights or your Magna Cartas or your constitutions. Doesn't matter. You can't have a future and nuclear. You just can't have it. Right? And 80 years of nuclear is global warming. People think global warming is not real, but it's actually real. It's caused by 80 years of radioactive fallout. Carbon doesn't pulse energy at the speed of light every second, 600 feet every second. The only thing on the planet that does that is something that's not supposed to be here in the first place. It's called anthropogenic man-made nuclear. And its adverse effects on the ecosystem are terrifying. And so we're not going to sugarcoat what's going on, because you can't have a future by downplaying the reality. You had 1 million atoms in North America of Xenon-133. You had 20 million particles. Particles are way worse than the atoms, by the way, which are brutal. 20 million particles of iodine fell on the U.S. You had 220, and Canada. That was a Canadian story, by the way, but it fell on the U.S., he says. That's an actual Canadian study out of Ottawa. These are numbers we never even conceived before, let alone have heard of. The West Coast hit with 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129, which never goes away. There's so many of these studies. These are actual studies. And so just the iodine-129, the 131 that I showed you, and the xenon-133, there's endless studies of different isotopes, by the way, with the same attributes. And the first thing it done was saturated the thyroid glands of everybody in all the species, which means you're producing radioactive hormones, particularly for the young children and adults, right? You know, the future generations. And when you're saturated with so much isotopes that you're doing it, that you're also going to be producing radioactive stem cells in your skeleton, because your skeleton is going to be saturated with the betas, right? But the gamma is pulsing energy 600 feet every second. So, armed with the knowledge and an endless amount of headlines about the harm, we went out and actually see if we can spot the actual harm. So I would spend 6 years doing research expeditions on the Pacific Ocean and now on the Atlantic. And again, we approached this from every direction. And we've done this because it actually melted down. So we launched emergency research expeditions because the plumes covered the entire planet. And what we discovered are species to your left are extinct. So I went back for year after year after year to see if the species recovered or if they just started to come back or anything. But every year it was even worse. There was less and less. And now, finally, it's like the moon. So normally if you shipwrecked anywhere on this coastline with 27,000 islands, you had enough food to sustain you if no one ever rescued you. You had tons of food. It was everywhere. And when you go back now, of course, the species to your left are exterminated by perpetual radioactive fallout. Because it never goes away, it never stops coming out, it never disappears. And so every day there's more of it there. And you got 1,000 fuel pools worldwide making those plumes too. The fuel pools are reactor cores that are splitting atoms. You know, like a reactor core powers 1 million homes and businesses. It does that by splitting atoms. When you take it out of the reactor core after 14, 15 months and put it in a fuel pool, there's no containment anymore. And it's boiling off the water. Each liter is saturated with trillions of anthropogenic deadly isotopes to everything with replicating cells. And they have so much power, so much influence, so much control because nobody opposes them. There's been no opposition. They've bought up everything and everybody. Except for maybe 5 people that I know about worldwide. And so, like, you know, I provide the documentations for all of my assertions. And it's a lot of work. It's a relentless amount of work. And I've been doing it for a very long time. But it's a relentless amount of work every day. And because we haven't got much time left. We're being exterminated. Not just from the air, land, sea, water, but they're poisoning your food supplies. All your fresh water is poisoned, which is your most important resource. If nothing else, you should fight to protect the water on the planet. Because this kind of pollution is lethal. The urgency is real. We got to get it together. And I run an educational program for over a decade on this topic alone. But I've been doing this for 22 years. But it's an educational program in Pacific so that we can have a debate. And guess what we're not having? After all this work, all this time, all this dedication, all this effort, all this monetary, all the research, we're still not having a conversation. And I'm the bad guy. In fact, they have smeared me to the point now where anybody looks up my name, they're going to just say, oh, well, he's a terrible person. I don't want nothing to do with him. And that, you know, you got 1,000 public relation firms. When they go to work on you, they go to work on you locally, provincially, federally, and worldwide. And they do it symmetrically at the one time. And this is what they've always done, right? So they chase people away. People, oh my God, you know, they said they got all this horrible stuff out there about me. I'm not going to fight this industry anymore. But when when I went to war against this industry, and that's what I done, I knew exactly what they were going to do to me. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't go and educate a population about a criminal empire that is exterminating your planet without that blowback. And so you got to be willing to take that. And you got to take it on the chin. You're not going to just roll it with your shoulders. It's in your face for the rest of your life. You'll never escape that harassment that they create against you, that animosity against you, that they artificially created and then inflated. It's been hellish, right? But what's even more hellish is not saying nothing. What's being even more hellish is that your media is pretending you're in a building that don't exist so that you don't wake up, so that you don't criticize the nuclear industry. Because the nuclear industry can't handle criticism. They can't even survive criticism. Cesium immediately damages the heart muscles. It's not slow acting. And that the model was based on 9 days of radioactive fallout. At 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air, cesium-137, which pulses energy 600 feet every second. This is a model of the Xenon-133 based on 20 days. But when you look at these pictures, these are before and after. I used to be a commercial diver. I'm very familiar with every facet of this coastline. With 27,000 islands. You don't know it all because it would take you 71 years to visit every island. One a day, right? What was nuclear worth trading off? Now, I went back for 6 years, 5 more years after the first year to see if the species started to recover. They didn't. There's no birds, there's no insects. There's no sound in the forest. You're talking about 27,000 tropical rainforest islands that are silent. When before pre-Fukushima, 2010, 2011, they looked like that. How does they get away? Well, they get away because everybody sits in silence and says, well, I don't know how to do this or I can't do that. I started it the same way. I didn't know how to do this. I didn't know how to do that. I had to learn everything the hard way. The school of hard knocks. But it's much easier to do now than it was back then. It's mindlessly easier to do now than it was back then. If you took screen captures of these pictures and you sent them to biologists and if you took posters and made posters of these and asked made posters of this, for instance. If you made posters, if you took a screen capture of that, or you can get the picture in higher quality on my website. If you took a picture of that and went to nuclear protests and informed everybody at the nuclear protest they're faking in reactor 4, it wouldn't take you long to build up a resistance. Because there's lots of activists out there. I'm just saying, right? If you took pictures of this stuff, and you can get this up at my website, and you text this or email it or printed it out and brought it around and distributed it to all the environmental activists, this is what Fukushima done, the war would be over already. We would have won. I provided everybody with everything they possibly need to win. This against this evilness of evilness. This is only a fraction of the media pretending they're in Fukushima Reactor 4. But you can still shake that tree with the truth. And we got 16 people on the show. 16. Bless your hearts. 16 people on the show, and we've been live for about a half an hour. That's censorship in overdrive, right? Because you ain't got a choice. And the world will come to its senses, but they're going to have the upper hand, aren't they? You got model after model after model of the radioactive fallout and academic studies to back it up, based on TEPCO's total release evaluation, which is a flawed dispersion model, is based on venting. It's not even based on the nuclear meltdowns. Radiation levels on the U.S. West Coast spiked to 1 million times normal after Fukushima. This was a study, 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air from France. You had Germany studies showing the entire Pacific Ocean irradiated in just 6 years. You got 865,000 cancers in Japan in just the first year. How many do you think there's going to be worldwide from the radioactive fallout of plutonium, which killed all the animals in all the studies? You got every nuclear power plant except for a few on the planet is surrounded by farms. And when you got endless studies saying this is the stupidest thing you can do, then there's only one reason you would do it, isn't it? I mean, the research clearly demonstrates this is an extinction event. Not maybe. And like, look at the International Atomic Energy Agency statement, June 2nd, 2011. They admitted there is no such thing as a safe level of radiation, that their standards are based on natural stuff, not man-made stuff. It's based on natural stuff, not man-made stuff. Based on natural stuff, not man-made. And that, so the International Atomic Energy Agency should be disbanded, completely disbanded. You got children with 11 atoms per kilogram start to see heart problems. At 11 atoms per kilogram, nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists. Nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists. Bear with me. I'm going to play a clip of the nuclear industry, how crazy they actually are, because I don't think the world understands how crazy this industry actually is.
When I was trying to pull this talk together, not only will I sort of get a little philosophical about the impacts and the like and try to put things in context, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about who are these radiation experts that get trotted out in events like this, or that get to participate in various activities and analysis to make pronouncements about is something safe or not safe. And if you look, you'll see organizations that are often represented. The ICRP, International Commission on Radiological Protection, a premier organization. You'll see UNSCEAR and IRPA. So UNSCEAR is the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. IRPA, the International Radiation Protection Association. The IAEA and some of its folks, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Our own US NCRP. And then there are a number of other organizations. So there's PAHO, there's the Health Physics Society, there's World Health Organization. All of these will bring in, as necessary, experts to speak to you on issues related to radiation protection, radiation safety, and impacts. But if you go a little deeper and you start looking at these organizations, the ICRP, for example, very well known, it's been operating nearly 100 years, not quite. Main commission, 10 people. It's got 5 standing committees, so it's 100-ish folks. I lead one of the 5 committees. If you look at the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation that looked at the effects from Chernobyl, from Fukushima, from other areas, and that has about 30, roughly, countries that are represented in that group. If you start teasing through these pictures, you're going to see the same people on every one of those organizations. So the same people from ICRP are on UNSCEAR, they're in IRPA. If you look at the NCRP, again, the US organization that advises the country on radiation protection issues, it's 100 people, a lot of gray-haired 100 people. And most of them are part of UNSCEAR, are part of IRPA, are part of ICRP, participate in IAEA. So the result, or the real world, is that there's not that many folks that really do radiation, radiation safety, radionuclide transport, dose calculations, all of this in the world. It's a pretty small club, and we wear 20 hats. Today I put on 3 pins, and I could put on a whole bunch more, but Health Physics Society, ICRP, Certified Health Physicist, I've got NCRP on there, I've done IAEA, and so the point is, we're a small group, you should cherish us.
So they all knew to laugh on cue, just like this is Kyle Vetter. This is TEPCO's spokesperson. That's Miles Allen, or the one-armed bandit, Miles O'Brien. The girl in the white dress, the creature in the white dress, is former nuclear regulatory. And then the podium has Kathleen Higley. And she explained to me how she wears all these pins and how there's 100 people making the decisions in your life. And they should cherish these 100 monsters. These are monsters. And this is the press, right? This is the media. And they all knew when to laugh. But nobody else knew it was a joke, but they knew when to laugh. They knew what the joke was. That's the nuclear industry. That's how it works. It's got 80 years of no resistance. And that the people there now, they feel like they're entitled to wipe out all the species for a paycheck. Nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists. And you're breathing it. You can't escape it anymore because of the pulse event at Fukushima, let alone 80 years of emissions into the ecosystem, let alone 1,000 fuel pools worldwide, hemorrhaging radiation plumes that covers the whole planet, a continuous plumes from 1,000 places worldwide. But it's invisible, and it's so minute. You can put 1 million atoms on the head of a needle, 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, you can't see it. And you only need one to start you down the path of sickness. And that could take 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years even. You will get sick from having that in your body. Your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells and builds a sarcophagus around it. We call it a tumor, right? 50 atoms a kilogram. So when you see Becquerel, the BQ, that's a Becquerel. That's a pulse of energy almost at the speed of light. 50 per kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs. And 50 in children lead to permanent heart damage and irreversible lesions in their vital organs, among every other issue imaginable. And you put 200 million atoms in the head of a needle and you can't see it. So 50 atoms, how do you perceive that? Your senses can't perceive it, right? You can't smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or pick it up. And having just one hot particle can cause the cancer. See, is the problem. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 atoms per kilogram of cesium-137 or uranium or plutonium or americium or neptunium or strontium or xenon or krypton or any of the other isotopes. And there's 1,000 fission products and daughters you've got to be seriously concerned about. You know, before Fukushima, the law in Japan, because they had 54 reactors, and so they had lots of emissions, but the limit then was 0.1 atom, Becquerel rather, 1 pulse of energy a second, which is an atom pulsing energy a second, per kilogram. When Fukushima happened, they raised it to 500 atoms per kilogram, and a year later, they dropped it down to 100 atoms per kilogram. Recent emissions of tritium from the Canadian reactors. The Canadian reactor is just a single reactor. If you look at the bottoms, UK, Sizewell, releases 8 trillion atoms a year. The Canadian CANDU reactors are 60,400,000 trillion atoms per year. This is like a large nuclear accident, but is legally allowed to be released because they can't contain it. But why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? That's quite concerning, I would imagine. Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms when all the studies, and there's endless studies, of 134 cesium, 85 strontium, 65 zirconium in tomato plants? Why would you have almost every single nuclear power plant on the planet surrounded by farms when you know that the risks of illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses are catastrophic? Why do that? Why is is almost every single nuclear power plant surrounded by farms when you know this is the worst possible scenario? Why do that? Why do that over and over and over, though? That's the question, isn't it? Why do that over and over when you know just a single 11 atoms per kilogram, you start to see heart problems in children? So imagine a fraction of that, you're going to see heart problems in insects and birds and animals and small mammals and everything else, because we're higher up the food chain, right? But at what point do we, as a collective, because, if you had 1,000 people coming out and spitting on the nuclear industry, they'd fall apart in a heartbeat. They can't handle any criticism whatsoever. One of the things was I felt that if I'd done an educational program, you would have all this conversation going on. I would maybe get drowned out in the background, and the industry would be busy chasing everybody else instead of 1,000 public relations firms shitting on me every day. But I also understood that could very well happen to me, and guess what? It's what happened to me. This is a nuclear weapons complex. It's also a reprocessing facility. It's also a nuclear dump surrounded by farms. This is Sellafield, United Kingdom. It doesn't look big to you, but there's actually 1,000 buildings there because it's so far away. It's hard to comprehend how, in goodness sakes, did we ever get to this. The only way it could happen was you had all the media worldwide and all the universities, academics, and professors knew to remain silent or knew to regurgitate the lies. But there was some dissenting voices. Inhaling just one hot particle can cause a cancer. So why are all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? Why, when they know that all the fruit trees, all the plants, everything is going to suck up the radiation, so why would you surround it? Why would you know when it's so harmful have a playground right alongside a nuclear reactor? Because of perpetual brainwashing, right? The media in particular, even the music industry, particularly universities, holy goodness, the betrayal is unbelievable. You literally should razz every university on the planet and start over again without the pro-nuclear community. Top radiation expert, 50 atoms a kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs. These plumes, this is the Krypton-133. These plumes cover the entire planet in just 19.5 days, 468 hours. The fuel pools are doing the same thing. There's 1,000 of them worldwide. Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms when it's the worst thing can happen to a human is eat food that's contaminated with radiation? Why, as a society, do we sit in silence? Because I can't sit in silence. I look up all these studies. I look up all these nuclear power plants. They're all surrounded by farms. I'm not stupid. I'm going to put two and two together pretty quick. Nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists. How many experts do you need me to find before the world makes a stand? Because I'll find them for you. I got them. I've gathered them up over the last 22 years. Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? Smalling mascot asks Fukushima kids to gargle to stay safe from radiation. Gargling can't make you safe. There's nothing you got can make you safe. The best filters we got on the planet can't filter out radiation because you can put 200 million of these terrible, deadly atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. How are you going to filter out 5, 10, 15, which is enough to cause you harm for the rest of your life? Yeah, it might take a decade or two to manifest at that rate, but the rates are much higher than that. You're being poisoned in all your major supermarkets. That's who's selling this stuff. The reactors melted down. They banned the food in 14 prefectures. Like Fukushima is over 1 billion pounds a year of rice. They didn't stop growing it. They shipped it everywhere else. Canada removed all restrictions after 93 days, while 55 countries banned it and 14 prefectures for a decade. Where do you think they shipped the food? 70% of the Canadians now are obese. And obesity after nuclear accident is a sign of radiation brain damage. You got irreversible heart damage for children with 50 atoms per kilogram. And you got all your nuclear power plants surrounded by farms. You're guaranteed infinitely more than that in the food per kilogram. That's why there's an epidemic of heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia, and the list goes on. That's why there's an epidemic of it. Because you got 80 years of this industry attacking you with something you can't perceive, you can't smell, you can't hear, you can't feel, you can't touch. And you can't learn about. You can't learn about it because I got 19 people on my show, the most important subject in human history. Not that you would know that, would you? Or talk to your friends or family. You cannot have that conversation. It's like, why are you talking about that? I don't need to know that. Let's talk about Trump. And they'll tell you 500 jokes about Trump. Each one more vile than the one before. I can't tell you anything about Fukushima. I was getting my hair cut the other day. And so, like, a hair salon, this is the biggest gossip spot on the entire planet, right? And every time I go there, I get the same response. I always try to go to a different hair salon. And I'll ask, eventually, because they're nosy as fuck, they'll ask this or that, and I'll get sick of it, and I'll say, have you ever heard tell of Fukushima nuclear meltdowns? And they'll stop and they'll turn their heads like a little puppy or something, where they're like trying to figure out what the fuck you just said to them. And say, no, I don't know nothing about it. And depending on their personalities, I'll either tell them what's going on or I just won't. But that's a great spot to spread the message, is your hair salon. 16 viewers. I'm just kicking it today. Censorship is pretty special, isn't it? It's the coward way to silence your opposition. Just censor them. I can't censor them, but they can censor me. And whenever I've heard it from quite a few sources, there's a lot of nuclear academics will go in a closet and turn the lights off and hide when I'm doing my shows. Because they're terrified their friends or families or loved ones are going to see this, and that's the end of them. It's the end of their fake story. Cesium-137 immediately damages the heart muscles, not even slow acting. Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms and fresh water or salt water? Because that's the quickest way to poison it, and that's what they're up to. And that's what they've already accomplished, haven't they now? Modeling of cesium-137 vertical soil transfer by a tree root system. So they really know that putting nuclear power plants in farmlands is a genocide. There's no illusions about this. Don't be fooled by the paid industry consultants. Low doses of ionizing radiation do cause cancers and lung problems and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid and adrenaline. You know, like when your thyroid is radiated, you're producing radioactive hormones. You got any idea how bad that's going to go? Like, and you might even have children down the road. You got any idea how bad that's going to go? And they might have children down the road. You got any idea how bad that's going to go? Where they're completely debilitating. This is the industry. This is keep you too busy to see what's on the other side of the fence. It's so evil. If you see nuclear, and if you live within 100 miles of nuclear, you're being severely poisoned. Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? Experimentally determined translocation of cesium in potatoes. So then, they know food sucks up radiation, so why is every nuclear power plant in farmland worldwide? Like when you see France is extraordinary when you look at the farmlands around their plants. But same in Canada, of course. The same everywhere. Or major freshwater sources, they'll compromise. And if there's a major freshwater source that feeds 20,000 farmland, they'll put it there. Content in food and habitat soil layers of meadow ecosystem. Half-life periods of cesium content in root and habitat. They studied every facet of it. If you go back and look at my Chernobyl anniversary video on the 25th, the 26th is the anniversary, I done the video on the 25th, right? And it's 3 hours of academic studies. They know everything there is to know about radioactive interactions in the ecosystem. They know it harms everything. There's nothing sacred. There's nothing with an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. I don't know how many studies was in that one, 400 or 500 studies. That's just a couple of days ago, last Thursday's show. Because I do my show Sunday to Thursday. Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? Well, that's the only way they can poison you constantly, effectively far away, right? Is ship the food and then use the big supermarkets. They have other ways. 16,000 homeless, destitute victims of society quit at Fukushima. They didn't quit. They got radioactive dosed and was severely destroyed. Xenon-133, this is not the total column. This is their numbers. This is Norwegian Institute for Air Research. This is not based upon the actual inventories, the real inventories. In fact, this plume model is not even... And look at it purple. You know what causes purple? When you burn potassium, it's purple. There's no radioactive materials when you burn are purple. So they're using purple as a signature, right, to manipulate you subconsciously. But that model is not even based on the emissions from reactor 4. The two fuel pools at the top of the buildings had decades of reactor cores. And we done a study, we done mathematical equations last night, that if you use their numbers, which is downplaying everything, you got around 18,000, almost 19,000 pounds of plutonium that were released from that building. But if you use the real numbers, the industry numbers, then it's around 62,000 pounds of plutonium at 6 million pounds. Was released into the environment. And that's from each reactor, which is almost 240,000 pounds of plutonium from the 4 reactor buildings, which each had 2 fuel pools at the top of the buildings, despite the fact that the media behind me is saying that they're in a pool, but there can't be because the building is actually gone. Health physicists in the United States worry about inhaling hot particles from Fukushima uranium plutonium, not cesium. Yeah, cesium's terrible too. But you have to worry about the fact that we got all these studies showing enormous radiation fallout on North America that are unconscionable numbers. Every number is scarier than the last one. One of the scariest things imaginable is that every farm, except for a couple, every nuclear plant except for a few, is surrounded by farms. How is that even possible? Because like the fuel pools, when you take the reactor core out and put it in a fuel pool 14 months later, this is what it's doing 24 hours a day. That stalled stack is purging from the fuel pool 120,000 liters a day. Boils off. But the fuel is full of billions of microscopic cracks per rod. They're hemorrhaging isotopes too. That's assimilated into the water boils off, and then it's released into the ecosystem. And so the heavy particulates, like water, full of radiation falling on the farmland. Got any idea how bad that accumulation is going to be? And that your Geiger counter is going to measure gamma. It can't measure, and just a little bit of gamma is very unreliable. It'll tell you something, but it's unreliable because it doesn't give you the alphas, the neutrons, the betas, the X-rays. And the numbers we're talking about are insane. So think about each one of these as an atom that's falling out. And think about it like a snowstorm, right? Except, you can't see it. But what's going on there is you got uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontiums, blah blah blah, right? And they're all different gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas, and they're pulsing energy. Each of them are pulsing energy almost at the speed of light, but it doesn't mingle. They're ricocheting off each other almost at the speed of light. That's called an X-ray. So everything is getting a full body X-ray. now worldwide, thanks to the nuclear industry, the idiot nuclear industry, the moron nuclear industry. They really are morons. They're the worst type. They're the idiot morons, right? The useful idiots to the nuclear industry. There's generation after generation now, generation after generation after generation. And they all think they're hot shots, they think they're special, they're getting these big paychecks. But they're actually just morons. They're generations of nuclear morons. Each one is even more scarier than the last one, more entitled than the last one. And they're unbelievably complacent. And they're doing it for a paycheck because that's what stupid does. Radiation, small doses, actually could be disproportionately worse. And the doses spread out over time might be more dangerous than doses given all at once. So if you're eating food here from these places in your large supermarkets, how are you going to know it? If you're eating it regularly, how are you going to know that you're not being poisoned for the last 75 years, 80 years? Wall Street Journal officials raised the radiation levels for residents to get iodine pills after the meltdown to 75 times higher than the crazies recommended for children. And the crazies being the World Health Organization. So they raised it 75 times higher. Not 2 times higher, not 3 times higher, which is just criminal. Not 4 times higher, not 5 times higher, not 6 times, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 30, 40 times higher, which is monstrous, which is genocidal, but 75 times higher, which is unhinged maniac mode. And then the counters they're using can't determine that anyway. But they raised it so that there was no way possible, they wouldn't have to raise it again, there was no way possible that the children can get any mitigation. And then they made that limit acceptable. So when you raise it 75 times higher, you're saying it's an acceptable dose. But there is no acceptable dose. You have to move out of there immediately. And they don't want you to move out, so they're not paying for it, so they're not going to say evacuate. The nuclear industry, the only reason the nuclear industry evacuated around Fukushima, because the plumes were so thick, they didn't want people dropping dead on their properties and in their homes because that would haunt the nuclear industry forever. So they told that bunch to move. And then Harvard University acknowledged these plumes were happening. But you don't need Harvard, you don't need Yale, you don't need Stanford, you don't need Oxford, you don't need MIT, you don't need Yale, you don't need Berkeley to quantify that those plumes were happening, because all you need is the documentation that exists everywhere. Right? The quickest way to win a nuclear debate with the nuclear industry about Fukushima is this picture right there. If nothing got out, how do you explain these pictures? They lose the debate, right? That's the end of the debate. So the best thing to do is just censor Dana, because Dana doesn't matter. He's only fighting for you and your loved ones and their loved ones and everybody else's friends and families in the 8 million species. I'm the enemy. Because I give a fuck. I'm the enemy. Irreversible heart damage for children. So why would you surround a nuclear power plant, build a nuclear power plant in farmland? Why would you do that? And I remember I was out, I wanted pictures for another reason. I wanted to see, what kind of area they were built in, and I was just thunderstruck to see that these places are surrounded by farms, and every one of them. And I knew at the time how dangerous and deadly this stuff is. I'm going to play 2 clips from Harvard University. And this was response to the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. And you can see these people. You can see these people are very solemn. Their job is to lie, but they also got to tell you some facets of truth, right?
And in the US context, we think of REM, and I assume in the Japanese context, people would think of gov't. The fatal dose from whole body exposure, median dose is around 350, 400 rem, or 3.5 to 4 sievert.
Delivered pretty quickly.
Delivered over a period of hours, but in that case death would follow over subsequent weeks. But that gives you an indication of the sort of hazard that you're concerned. So a few sieverts, if the dose looks as though it'll be more than 2 or 3 sieverts over a period of plume passage, for example, then you know that you're in a potentially lethal situation. Whereas speaking in microsieverts is not helpful.
The guy on the end over there, he showed up over this last year or so in other interviews where he's spoken out about quite a few things. He switched. This guy here, look how solemn like his hands are. He doesn't want to be there, but he wants to tell the truth, but he knows he can't tell the whole truth. TEPCO confirmed the steam coming up from underground at the number 1 reactor is 4.7 sieverts per hour. Like in a paper suit, you're a dead man right away. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. You'll die that day or that week for just a short experience. But 4.7 sieverts in the steam, it means that whole area. Like, they call it 4.7 sieverts, it's going to bioaccumulate. So the original stuff coming out of the ground from the China syndrome, the original stuff coming up out of the ground is 4.7 sieverts. But after 5 minutes or so, it's 25 sieverts, that whole area. After 10 minutes, it's 30, 40, 50 sieverts, that whole area. Because it's not like it just turns to fucking dust, stardust, and goes away. Imagine, if you will, a world run by psychopaths. Well, that's Raphael Grossi right now in the nuclear industry. It's a world run by psychopaths, right? The mentally handicapped are working at Fukushima, not nuclear scientists, not nuclear academics. And when you compare Fukushima to Chernobyl, there's nothing left of Fukushima. Chernobyl was a brand new reactor. It was a graphite reactor. Each of the reactors in Japan are 100 Chernobyls, but at the top of each of the buildings in Japan was 8 reactor cores and 2 fuel pools. It could have been 10 reactor cores. Like, remember, Canada, on June the 14th, 2011, lifted all restrictions, not some, but all restrictions on food imports from Japan. But you're talking about the food was banned in 14 prefectures by 55 countries. They couldn't ship it anywhere, only Canada. Doomsday-like radiation release, if the fire in the pool at Unit 4, would be a global catastrophe. So this is reactor 4. The fuel pool is about 120 feet above where my finger is to, way up. It would be a global catastrophe. Doomsday-like radiation releases, 18,000 to 62,000 pounds of plutonium alone. And then the common span fuel pools had 8,300 assemblies. Each assembly is 1,800 pounds. You got 100 fuel rods, and they weigh 18 pounds each and are 12 feet long. U.S. government, the radioactive material from nuclear is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. It's like explosions going off in the cells that blow holes in the DNA. Dr. Bill McBride, UCLA School of Medicine, Vice Chair for Research in Radiation. Mom, Dana's spreading conspiracy theories. Well, they won't mention me. They're not allowed to mention me because people looks me up, then they're going to realize I'm actually a good person, unlike them. Official 311 notebook concerned half of Japan to be covered in nuclear waste. So 16-year-olds should be prepared to die if your power plant breaks down. Why would you want that on your planet for? Why would you tolerate that? Send us people who don't mind dying. Do you know anybody that doesn't mind dying? Do you think they were talking to nuclear scientists, nuclear academics, nuclear companies, the pro-nuclear community? How many nuclear scientists and pro-nuclear community answered the call, I wonder? Oh, that's right. Think of it as Tokyo Vice Governor said they picked up 30 million one-ton bags. 30 million. We all Japanese must face it. You better face something. The best thing to start off with is hold these people accountable. The videos are in my video, not under the live stream, but under the video. You'll find these videos. It's hard to comprehend that this industry is as evil as it is. But what are you going to do with about all the evidence, see? Rice planted 10 miles from Fukushima. 1,000 years from now, contaminated water will still be entering the Pacific Ocean. And New York Times, radioactive material like cesium are brought back to the surface each year. They're brought back to the surface each year by plant growth and pollinators. Radiation levels of several dozens of sieverts possible near Reactor 2, not in Reactor 2, but near it. It was actually 1 million originally outside of Reactor 1. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. What's 1 million, I wonder? International Atomic Energy admits there's no safe level of radiation, and that their standards are based on bananas and potato chips, not on nuclear reactors. Japan's worst-case scenario assumes significant public exposures to occur by the end of March the 12th because of the pressure buildup that would damage the number 1 reactor. So after day 1, there would be significant public exposure. And reactor 1 is to your left. It blew up, right? So did reactor 3, much more spectacularly because it's a plutonium mixed oxide fuel reactor. So it cooks off at about 200,000 degree hotter temperatures when it erupts the radioactive material worldwide. Not just cancer, but low doses causes heart diseases and strokes. Heart diseases and strokes. What are we seeing a massive amount of right now? Oh, that's right. Heart diseases and strokes. And you know what they're blaming it on? It ain't Fukushima, is it? Right? It was all put together just to do that, to cover up Fukushima's deadly effects worldwide. A new record of 740,000 atoms per kilogram. TEPCO finds the most polluted fish since Fukushima nuclear accident. There's infinitely worse, just because that's TEPCO, so that's going to be a low-ball number. These are catastrophic numbers. Every organism in Fukushima prefecture is contaminated with radiation. So if there's people out there getting paid just to censor me on YouTube so that the world can't have a chance, the world can't have a conversation, the world can't have a future. And they'll look for any little facet and they'll disregard all the evidence. They'll look for a little facet and then they'll use that to censor me. They'll disregard all the evidence. If they hear one little thing that they think they can utilize and justify now to censor me, they'll scrap everything they just learned because they can't come here and watch me without actually understanding how evil they are. So when the worms, organisms, feces is at 1.4 million atoms per kilogram, 60 miles away. Every organism in the prefecture is contaminated. So when you got Kishida Mashada telling everybody, attacking me all the time for the last decade, and he has endless resources, right, to attack me. From the Chicago division, Tokyo Bureau. He's very proud of himself, right? He's very boisterous. He's just another idiot. We've talked to him lots. He's just an idiot. You can tell he's like moron level IQ. He really is. He's very, very, very low IQ. So obviously he's an inbreed. That's why he got that particular job. But he stalked me for over a decade. A stalking. 1.4 million atoms per kilogram in the worm's excrement. And you're growing food there and shipping it worldwide. You really think that's going to work out good? You really think that shouldn't be stopped? And so the industry can't have a debate. If you go through the legacy, the 80 years of nuclear, they've never had a debate a single time. It's always control opposition. It's very structured. Yeah, just removing the topsoil, and it was only 2 centimeters, scratching that up and putting it in 1-ton bags. There's 30 million of them. That was 3% of the land. So every time the wind blows or there's rain, everything is recontaminated again because 97% of the land has never been they have never even tried to mitigate it. You can't mitigate it because it's still melting down. And they lost, the inventories that they lost was a pulse event, right? Yeah, and they've, the 30 million 1-ton bags are being cut open now. They're growing food in it because no one's paying attention any longer. And they're growing food in a nuclear wasteland that's abandoned for 13 years in Okuma, Futaba. They're actually cutting open the bags and dumping it and growing food in it. And it's going to be for sale because everybody stopped paying attention. No intentions of storing it for 1 million years. Kyoto News uses terms like hot zone to describe Miyagi, Iwate, and Tochigi prefectures, not just Fukushima, 2012. Japan Times is okay for babies to drink radioactive milk because adults have natural potassium in the body. Right, that's what I mean. Like, you got the major medias. Japan Times is one of the biggest medias in Japan, period. It's the government mouthpiece, too. And suggest that, and so they're conflating anthropogenic man-made radiation from the nuclear meltdowns with natural potassium. And the difference between potassium, I'll show you the difference actually, between potassium and man-made radiation. It's extraordinary. It's really extraordinary, isn't it? So potassium is equal to 71 10 millionths of a curie per gram. But it's still not harmful. You can't make a dirty bomb or a weapon out of potassium-40. It's natural. Everybody's acclimated to it through genetic superior selection. It's homeostasis. Your body regulates the same as a thermostat regulates the temperature of the house, or cruise control regulates the speed of an automobile. Your body regulates. It's harmless and innocuous. It's benign. Cesium has 88 curies per gram, though. And just a single atom of cesium or strontium-90, your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells and eventually builds a tumor around it. But potassium is 71 10 millionths of a curie. Like, so bananas should never, ever have a mention in this conversation, right? But that's what they done. And originally, for the first couple of years, you had to come out and curb stomp everybody in the nuclear industry. And so they say, go ahead and drink the radioactive milk for your babies because adults have potassium. Like, that's the level of evilness that it's hard to comprehend. That the journalist would actually publish something with those connotations. Right? And a curie is 37 billion atoms that are man-made. Potassium is not man-made. It's stardust. We're already acclimated to it through genetic superior selection. We can't live without it. It's harmless. It's everywhere. Everything got potassium in it. The microphone's got potassium. The cover's got potassium. The wires have got potassium. My clothing, there's potassium. It's natural. It's stupidly, ridiculously harmless. So they conflate the two of them and justify that as poisoning your children with radioactive milk. That person should be arrested and get publicly executed when they're convicted, right? They'd hang people in Japan, so they should be hung. Japan Prime Minister, half the people in Japan were close to being evacuated after the start of Fukushima. And so what he said was if reactor 4 caught fire, they would have to evacuate Tokyo. And so what they done was pretended it didn't happen when it actually did. So imagine having to evacuate half the people in Japan. Like Tokyo is 36 million people in metropolitan Tokyo. And reactor 3 was the mixed oxide fuel, which is much worse than normal meltdown, normal reactor emissions, which according to the American government is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Reactor 3, though, was fueled with plutonium. So reactor 3 was very high grade. So reactor 4 was somewhere between 18,000 and 62,000 pounds of plutonium, depending on whose model you use. If you use the official model, the actual model that pre-Fukushima, it's 62,000 pounds of plutonium at 1%. If you use their current propaganda, it's still 18,000 pounds. Because they downplay every facet of it, and then they downplay the quantity, and they downplay the inventories, they downplay the poundage of the assemblies on top of that, right, to deflate the actual real numbers. Reactor 3 fueled with plutonium, so reactor 3 would have been 500,000 to 1 million pounds of plutonium lost. Right, and when reactor 3 cooked off, to your right, I'll get a picture for you. Reactor 3 is over there. Well, what's left of it, the stump of reactor, ghost of reactor 3. We just can't sit in silence. They're wearing tungsten vest outside of Medusa. Reactor 3 is the Medusa. Tungsten vest is not going to be a nuclear scientist. It's going to be the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society, immigrants who don't speak the language. Fukushima Daiichi worker dies have been preparing cover for unit number 3. Of course, if you go and listen to the propaganda, they'll say nobody died at Fukushima. But there's endless people who have died at Fukushima. My goodness. Government report, reactor 3 may have had second meltdown a week after the first one. You know, when helicopters can't go in and dump water because of the radiation, how can humans go in there ever? Well, nuclear scientists have never went to Fukushima. High radiation forces withdrawal of workers trying to restore power. You can't restore power. Look, when these things blew up, there's no restoring power. What was the date on that? I'm sorry. March the 18th. So March the 18th, this is what it looked like. How are you going to restore power? Like, when you look at the explosion, nobody's thinking about restoring power, okay? That's reactor 3 detonation. We may not be able to live in Japan someday. Well, no, that's what we got a poll tonight. Should Japan, now a nuclear wasteland, be abandoned due to the massive radioactive fallout? Yeah. I mean, it's clearly, all the evidence I'm showing you so far unequivocally points that Japan should be abandoned. Fukushima worker warns, get out of Japan by spring because the radioactive pollen is very serious. It was counts were at 4,000 per cubic meter of airflow, radioactive pollen. Like, as soon as this happens, you're supposed to get out of Dodge. And like, Tokyo's 240 kilometers away, you're still too close. You want to be preferably on another continent and not where the prevailing winds are going to blow. Japan's prince's son, no one died. No one got injured from Fukushima. No one is worried about radiation. So when the emperor's house is doing that, the betrayal is the ultimate. Right, Disneyland will paint these there's a word for these types of people besides monsters, I suppose. We'll paint these monsters as good people, as noble and protecting their country and their common man and caring and everything else. It's the complete opposite of reality. It's so far opposite of reality, it'd make the average person throw up if they understood how evil these people actually are. Japan Times columnist, the public possibly worldwide sickens over time. The truth will come out about Fukushima. As the publicly worldwide sickens over time is the right connotation. That's the proper connotation. Scientists reveal unprecedented mass mortality on the West Coast beginning the summer 2011. Many millions of deaths before the sea star wasting syndrome. There was no studies out there quantifying the so-called sea star wasting syndrome. They melt it down from, because they use salt water like we use blood, right? And so the radiation permeated through their entire system. Mortality rates of 99.99. We quantified that from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska by sea, non-stop by ocean, out there for 4 to 5 months a year on the ocean. I showed you that evidence at the beginning, pictures from the research expeditions, for 6 years. And you can't access that coastline without using a boat. Yeah, there's little spots you can go to, but that's not real research, okay? You got to go out into where there's no communities, there's no conflict of pollutions, wade to the wilds and spin and go through huge vasts of coastlines to prove that, for a fact, that this is an extinction event. So there's no way they can argue. That's what I went and done. So there was no wiggle room where they can say, oh, there's a community here, a community there, or mining going on in that area. That killed all of them off, right? We went out into the very remote places and stayed for 4 to 5 months at a time. Unprecedented cataclysmic die-off of birds on the entire West Coast. Beaches covered with dead bodies. It's tragic. They've never seen anything like it, 2015. Now it's regular. Now you expect to see it every summer. Oh, here comes another mass die-off. There should be a couple of million birds this time, I bet. Let's go to the beach and have some fun, watch the birds die with the kids. We got to stop these sorts of reports coming out. This was a Dr. Geraldine Thomas from the United Kingdom. A real-life monster, right? Yeah, Jerry Thomas at Imperial College. Imperial College of London, there's a lot of unbelievable scumbags from that university. Holy smokeroos. We're talking about scumbaggery and overdrive. Gunnison, the scumbag, the degenerate, says, move south of the equator if Unit 4 fuel pool goes dry. That's the fuel pool over there. Gunnison knew the fuel pool was gone dry. He was looking for street creds, right? Let me play a little clip, a couple little clips of Gunderson. So you really appreciate the snake oil salesman that he actually is. He's an extraordinarily evil person. Give me a second or so. And don't forget Helen Callaghan, the lunatic. There we go. I'm going to adjust the volume.
Now, the division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima. And
Unit 4 has always been my biggest concern. If you watched our website, on the very first week of the accident, I was saying that if Unit 4 were to catch fire, you'd have to evacuate Tokyo.
So Unit 4, you got to evacuate Tokyo. He
now,
also
said
to move south of the equator if Unit 4 goes dry. So in the video, he said right away if Unit 4 goes, should evacuate Tokyo. And I put the two pictures back there. He supports the one to the left, not the one to the right. This is Unit 4. poster inside of Fukushima. This is not the end. It's the beginning of a new nuclear age. That's March the 10th, for goodness sakes. 2013, the day before the second anniversary. Radiation of the destruction of humanity in the 8 million species. Radiation-contaminated prefectures like Chiba should also start a serious health damage survey as soon as possible. Of course, if you're going to rely on the government, then you're done. Chinese officials call Chiba an area with high radiation risk. State secret bill meant to suppress Fukushima news. That's used against me, right? Japan public stunned as the citizens could face years in prison. A man's mouth was stuffed with cloth after voicing opposition. And to call it a leak is one of the biggest egregious crimes imaginable. So Japan's princess said no one died, no one got injured, nobody. No one is worried. Extreme increase in mortality is caused by cardiac diseases in Fukushima. The numbers might give the creeps to some people. In just 1 month, it was up 12,700 extra deaths in just a single month from heart attacks. Huge spikes, 7.7% for cancers. Cardiac diseases were up 14.6%. These numbers might give the creeps to some people. The death rates. Well, not the nuclear industry, they celebrated it, no doubt. Massive die-offs of sea creatures from California and Alaska. They're starving as the food chain continues to collapse. Mass starvation, talking about all species. Disease outbreak on the U.S. West Coast is largest ever seen in any population of animals. Many scientists believe radiation from Fukushima is to blame. Tens of millions of dead animals. TV, it's like a scene from a horror movie along the West Coast. There's no food out there. I was on the ocean at that time doing research expeditions. Scientists can't figure out why there's mass starvation of seabirds. Like at that time, in 2015, it was 1.4 million, the numbers came out after, of common murres up by Alaska and British Columbia that showed up emaciated. And at the same time, there was over 1 million Cassini auklets that showed up. And so they both feed at different spectrums of the food chain. One's microscopic, and the common murres feed on anchovies and squids and sardines and krill and herring and capelin and sand lances and small 8, 9, 10-inch fish, right? And they dive 600 feet all day. And so if they show up starvation, and the pictures I showed you earlier of the coastline that was normally massive species was completely wiped out, now you know why they're showing up starved, because there's no substitute for the migratory. Japan radiation experts after 3/11 don't just leave Tokyo 240 miles away, leave the country. Fukushima fallout at the Canadian embassy in Tokyo was 225,000 atoms per square meter. X-ray-like images show radioactive contamination spread throughout the grass, leaves collected from Fukushima to Tokyo. And again, the study from France, the French government, the IRSN French government, on nuclear radiation risk under the Ministry of Defense and Environmental Industry Research showed 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137 per cubic meter of air. Remember, cesium pulses energy 600 feet every second. That plume, I showed you the other versions of that plume from the French government, because that one's only based on 9 days. They came out with other models. This is based on 30 days, which is 25 days of radioactive fallout when the plume stops. And so this is day 20, right there after the tsunami, 15 days after the meltdown all reactors detonated. This is 30 days. 30 days of radioactive fallout. The plume never stopped. Plumes never went away. Agency is funding projects to monitor online information about Fukushima. Around-the-clock monitoring of blogs on nuclear power. They really don't have anybody to pick on. There's just 5 people that I know of. Officials are trying to brainwash the public about Fukushima. Virtually no public support for nuclear power, which is 100% true, right? Monitor blogs on nuclear power, radiation issues, as well as Twitter accounts around the clock. Oh, they're much more sophisticated now. They're using artificial intelligence to destroy you. I got 25 people on a show I've been doing for over a decade, 5 days a week. 25 people. Bless your hearts, by the way. 25 people. And I have pittance. I have 23 thumbs up and 26 votes. This is pittance. Like the worst live streamers on YouTube does better than this. I have the lowest numbers. I at best, if I'm lucky, I get 10 subscribers a month. That's something I've been doing for a decade. They took down my other site when I got 25,000 subscribers. And I was out looking for spiders on a research expedition 2 years ago, and we discovered the spiders were missing. I'm like, holy shit, this is big. And I was 400 miles away from home in the woods, 400 miles out into the woods by myself, looking for spiders and other species. Spiders were gone, and so I had put out a video because these researchers had come through that were from Nova Scotia, and they were on vacation, and they were taking the trails with their side-by-sides and quads. There were 16 or something of them, and they were going across the province. They got on the ferry, got off Newfoundland, rode across the province, which is 900 miles on trails, and then gets back on the ferry. It's legal to do it, right? And you're driving your quads and your side-by-sides. You can leave your vehicles at the terminal, and tourists do it a lot from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. And so the old abandoned train tracks, they took the rails up now, and you can skidoo across the province in the wintertime or go across it in the summertime on the quads, right? So it's a great way to get deep into the interior of the country. So they showed up at one of my campsites, was on a salmon river, and I was talking fisheries and oceans the day before, and they were asking me, was I seeing anything? Because nothing was coming up the gates. And because I have underwater drones, right? And I was showing it to them. And I said, there's nothing out there. They said, yeah, I know. And when they started asking me what I was doing, they were blown away. They were saying, oh, shit, I didn't know this. And the squid were showing up. They were incredibly skinny, and they were rolling on the beaches. No one's ever seen that before. And the same thing with the capelin. All the old-timers were like, they're so skinny, I've never seen nothing like it. Dana goes on, they said, like a 12-hour plane ride. So, like, you can't confront anthropogenic man-made radiation like a plane ride. The radiation goes in your body. It's there for the rest of your life. You get on a plane, first off, and then you land, right? But the radiation you're getting from a plane got nothing to do with anthropogenic man-made radiation. It's totally different. You can't conflate these two. And they do it. They say it's like a banana, like a potato chip, like walking in the sunshine, like climbing a mountain, like sleeping next to somebody, like eating peanut butter, for goodness sakes. They say it's like 15 minutes in a kayak or a week in New York City. This is crazy assertions. They got nothing to do. But I got 80 years of regurgitating. Each generation regurgitates those exact same lies. And because people are conditioned by TV, by Hollywood, by radios, in increments over decades. And I mean, if you look at The Simpsons, that's meant to make people complacent about nuclear waste, make them completely, like Homer Simpson leaving the plant in the very beginning of it. And he's got a fuel rod in his hood. Like, if you've got a fuel rod in the other end of my house, in the buildings, for instance, I'm going to die in 20 minutes. But yet Homer got his in his hood, and he's driving down the road, and he picks it up and looks at it and throws it out the window. These are lethal doses right away we're talking about. So it makes people, and then they're hitting the children now with the Hulk and and Spider-Man, which were created by the nuclear industry. So was Simpsons, right? Funded and created by the nuclear industry. So was SpongeBob, right? Incredibly famous show. Unimaginable amount of famous actors doing their voices on it. Meant to manipulate the children. There's an agenda that is so massive that the average person couldn't possibly comprehend it on their own. 20% of the stuff that kids are digesting is from the industry. It's very subtle how they do it, and it's very thorough. Many experts now believe government officials covered up the true extent of the health risk from Fukushima and radiation can no longer pull the wool over people's eyes. 2012, but obviously they could. 12 million yen, which was 58,000 US back then, being spent on the city to Twitter. You gave Twitter 58,000 US dollars to censor Twitter. Easy money, right? All you gotta do is like you turn up a song on your computer, they turn down your numbers on Twitter the exact same way. Just made $58,000 by going bleep. And the censors out there, they're making a fortune to censor me right now. They're sitting there waiting with their hand on the button, waiting to censor me. If he says this or he says that, we're allowed to censor him. Doesn't matter. They just ignore the truth, incapable of comprehending, or they're just evil, one or the other, or both. Japanese teachers, students are being taught pro-nuclear propaganda, told radiation is less than dying of old age, less risk than dying of old age. Teacher, I'm lying to a room full of students. Fukushima City should be evacuated. One of the very few truths, isn't it? Shocked major Japan paper. Cancer risk in Fukushima probably infinitesimal. More radioactive contamination should be allowed in food and where people live. Don't question burning debris. A major Japan paper is not a shock, though, is it, anymore, now that we got hindsight. It's the norm. Your media actually hates your guts. People were taken from theaters back in 1957 when Windscale melted down, which is now called Sellafield, which was a plutonium mixed oxide reactor. And so they went to the theaters with buses and kidnapped the people from the back row, because back in those days, the poor people sat in the back of the theaters, right? And brought them to the nuclear meltdown to push the fuel rods out of the reactor core, because they used graphite reactors back then. The stupidest thing imaginable, really. But they didn't go to the universities and get nuclear students. They didn't go to the other nuclear power plants and get nuclear volunteers. They didn't call up the nuclear companies. There's massive amount of nuclear companies, and use them. They went to the theater with guns and buses and stole the people from the back rows of the theaters. And that's the legacy, too, of all the nuclear industry does stuff like this. When you do what they call maintenance on these reactors, every 14 months or so, they change out, say, 1/3 of the fuel. Well, they're bringing 1,000 people. And that 1,000 people are not going to be showing up in the statistics. They're not going to be getting health insurance, or they're not getting pensions or anything from that nuclear plant. They're just there for a couple of weeks' work, right? And that's why they bring them there. So, because if the regular employees do it, they're going to get incredibly poisoned. And that's going to show up in the health records later down the road, right? So they're bringing over 1,000 what they call blue-collar tradesmen to do the work, because when you open up the reactor core, you're going to release huge amount of radiation into the ecosystem. That's why there's 6 times more breast cancer within 15 miles of a nuclear power plant. So if you had a bunch of daughters or a single daughter, knowing that, would you want to live within 15 miles of a nuclear power plant? Of course not. Hopefully. Unless you're a nuclear industry, I'm sure you wouldn't care. Because you're invisible. That's what you are. Students being taught pro-nuclear propaganda. Fukushima probe, nuclear disaster is far from over. The government evaded admitting meltdowns and delayed disclosure of the radiation data 2011. They didn't even admit to it until about 4 years later. And then they finally admitted it, but no one cared at that point. Everybody was too busy forgetting about it. Japan's government trying to stop the citizens from taking their own radiation measurements. Well, they banned international Geiger counters right after Fukushima in Japan. Public anger exploding as Japan discovers more about government downplaying spread of Fukushima radiation and the health dangers. TEPCO paid for the creation of a blacklist of actors and musicians who are against the nuclear industry. Right, over and over and over, you see this industry is very thoughtful. It's very organized. It's very articulated. It's very determined to go after any dissenting voices. It has enormous deep pockets. It has unbelievable deep pockets, see? Radiation forecasts can by no means be released to the public, decided the government on March the 15th. Shows radioactive clouds spread over. We got an unbelievable amount of these types of headlines over many months. Journalists covering Fukushima reportedly harassed and imprisoned on the return to Tokyo. What are the names of the people you met in Fukushima? And tortured, right? Nuclear scientist, Nagasaki survivor, canceled Fukushima press conference because the government is worried about causing widespread fear. This is why you got 100 signs around nuclear plants so you can panic. Fukushima decontamination workers threatened, we were punished if we tried to resist. When you look at the reactors, and when you look at boat reactors, like reactor 3 and reactor 4, the fuel pools and the reactor cores at the top of the buildings. I put it on the big screen. How can anybody misinterpret that? How can you look at that and say, oh yeah, no, because the average person don't understand nuclear. The industry's made it impossible for the average person to want to understand nuclear. But it's not a difficult subject. Like if you find my site, you begin to put two and two together quite quickly. Work at Fukushima plant to go on for 10,000 years. Longer than human history. Think of this statement. Worst case was abandoning Tokyo forever, not only evacuating. If you're evacuating because of nuclear, then you don't go back. You go back is only because you're a well-disciplined idiot. This is the only accurate statement you're going to see. As the public worldwide sickens over time, the truth might come out of Fukushima. Except they got lots of cover stories to working at Fukushima is equivalent to be given an order to die, says radiation experts. $190 taxi ride from workers to get home from a free medical clinic. Like they do they're so articulated at sabotaging. Debris from Fukushima nuclear plant is being ground up and burned in other parts of Japan. And we have absolute horror stories of the incinerators where employees at the incinerators dropping from heart attacks, multiple people in a single day. And there's lots of people tried to warn you originally, but they quickly were silenced or went silent. Mysterious cancers killing sea lions. And the research expeditions, I put pictures earlier in the show, will really help drive those points home. Fatally high levels of radioactive material have entered the ocean. It's a serious pollution problem. We may be on the precipice of an extinction event in marine wildlife. Well, no, we may not be on the precipice. We are on the precipice of an extinction event. This is not maybe. This is an extinction level event. That's what they got done to us. Well, there you go. That's what we got today. We're done an early show today because I never got no sleep last night, and that means I'm going to be burnt out. Because I usually do my shows 10 p.m. And so if I wait till 10 p.m. to do my show, I'm probably not going to do a show tonight, so I have to do a show today. Because we can't let the nuclear industry get a day off. We got to try our best. I'll feel guilty if I don't do a show to come out and kick the shit out of this pathetic nuclear industry. These are your enemies, make no mistake about it. And they hate you, and they have the upper hand. You need to get educated, because whether you're doing anything or not, you need to protect yourself. And you have to take everything I'm showing you as serious. Everything I show you is verified. There's no misrepresentation. There's no need to do that. No exaggeration. There's no need to. The evidence is quite clear and it's overwhelming. I'm just trying to do the moral and ethical thing. I'm going to close the poll down. Should Japan now, a nuclear wasteland, be abandoned due to Fukushima massive radioactive fallout? Who the hell would say no? When why would you say no unless you're pro-nuclear, I suppose? I can't comprehend it anyway. Alrighty, see everybody tomorrow. Have a great day. Hugs for everybody. Yeah, thanks, Dana. Good night, everybody. I'll see everybody on the next installment of Madness. Take care, folks.